Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Farmers Weekly Transition webinar. It's all about replacing machinery and what is the best option to your farm. And as we get into our next hour and 15 minutes, we'll find out that there is no one simple answer to this, and it will depend on what you're doing on your farm. And that's what we're here to discuss. My name's Hugh Broome. Normally, I host the Farmers Weekly podcast, but every so often I get to host one of these webinars, which is great. I am joined by a panel of esteemed experts in the areas of machinery, farming, and finance. So what I'm going to do, as normal, is I'm going to go round and I'll get our guests to introduce themselves. So firstly, let's go to David Ferber, who works for Claydon Drills. You're the sales manager there at Claydon Drill, David. Tell us a bit about yourself and why you're qualified to be here, David.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. Yeah, I'm David Ferber. I'm the sales manager for Claydon Drills in the UK, near Newmarket. I've worked in the agricultural machinery business for 30 years. So my experience is more with machinery and trailed implements. But I've met a lot of people during that time and got a experience of the machinery trade.
Thank you very much, David. Let's move to Gary. Gary Markham joins us from the Eastern Counties near Huntingdon. Gary, why are you here?
Hi, Hugh. Hello, everybody. Yeah, Gary Markham. I'm a director and owner of Land Family Business, which is a firm of accountants specialising in agriculture and tax. And I have a history of being involved in agriculture, farming, etc.
Thank you very much, Gary. Let's go to Gordon. Now, Gordon Cummings joins us live from a hotel room in Cheshire, which isn't his normal domain, but that could explain why it's a bit sketchy. So if we lose Gordon's video, don't panic, people. It could be the bandwidth in the hotel. We'll go to audio. But for now, Gordon, please tell us about yourself and where you're from.
Yeah, I'm up here in Cheshire. We've just had one of our case arrive and drive days for our Northwest members, so that's why I'm up here. So I'm Gordon Cummings. For my sins, I've been in the agricultural machinery trade for, I'm just adding it up, it's frightening, 47 years. I started with a little company called Shelbourne Reynolds, then went to a dealership in Lincolnshire, Peacock and Binnington. They took on the Class franchise. I fell in love with Class machinery, and 22 years later, I was general manager of what they now call Class Eastern, which is Lincolnshire, Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire, the largest Class dealer in the UK. From there, I went to help restart a little case dealership in my hometown of Louth in Lincolnshire. Then 6 years ago, I joined Fram Farmers, initially as their machinery advisor. But then I seemed to get promoted, and now I look after a department in Fram called GFI, which is basically fuel, machinery and building materials. I don't do all of that myself. I have a little team of people, a really good team of people that do that. So yeah, 47 years experience, 20 odd of them with a major manufacturer class.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And finally, to Mike Pennell, who joins us from Bedfordshire. You're our token farmer for the evening, Michael.
I am token farmer, and indeed the substitute token farmer, because your intended participant dropped out on Tuesday, so you went through your little black book, and for some strange reason, it's got my name in it, Hugh. So yes, I'm a farm manager in Bedfordshire, Whitbread Farms. We have 1,000 hectares of combinables plus small beef sucker enterprise, big environmental enterprise, but the arable is the focus, really, the focus of most of my time. And we are fully regen 7-8 years now into it, and I would say rather than now transitioning, we're sort of coming to a stage where we're fine-tuning processes and done a lot of the hard work already back in history.
You're sat there smugly looking over the fence thinking, what a fine job you've done, Michael. Well done. Right, so we've got a fantastic panel tonight. Don't forget, there is on your attendee screen a little box that you can write your name and put a question. And please do exactly that. If you put your name, put where you are, because it's always nice to find out where people are texting in from, and throw your question into the ring. We've got some pre-submitted questions. We've got loads of those as well. But if you want a question as as we go along, please do. So just push the text through on the box, and we will look forward to getting those from you. The first question, and it's the top of the list actually of these pre-submitted questions, and I'm going to firstly push it across to Gary. There's a question from Mike Porter. How do you reduce the cost of depreciation, Gary? Is there one simple way of reducing the cost of depreciation, or is it something we just have to live with and factor in?
It's a very complex depreciation. Not many farmers understand it because it's not cash. It doesn't hit the bank account. So basically, you need to start very briefly with if you buy a tractor for 100,000 pounds, obviously that tractor reduces in value every year, and it reduces in a curve basically. So on average, a tractor and anything with an engine in will reduce around about 15% on what we call a reducing balance basis. So what you're doing on an annual basis is monitoring that drop in value, and that drop in value is a cost to the business, which is the depreciation. And so there's a number of things that one of the key points is nothing to do with tax. So therefore, depreciation is purely a management tool to monitor the drop in value of your machinery. 15% on anything with an engine, I find 20% on anything that's trail behind. That reduces the profit. We've all seen profit on sale of assets in our accounts. Now, what that means, if your depreciation is too high or too harsh, then you sell that machine. There's a profit, a book value profit on that sale. So you need to minimize that because that's just a clawback on too high a depreciation. Yeah. So obviously, the depreciation itself is absolutely linked to the value of kit. And we can talk again perhaps later on about the actual value of machinery per hectare and per acre in businesses is very high. The point is because we've had high inflation in machinery over the last few years, and the cost of machinery has risen substantially. Therefore, when you exchange kits and buy kit, to write that kit off is quite high. So I think the key point is 15. Make sure that your accountants use 15% with anything with an engine, 20% of anything behind it, to give as true value as possible over the useful life of an asset.
And presumably you're not going to go on going. You're what, 15% every year for 5 years, presumably, and it's because at some point you're going to bottom out that figure, aren't you?
No, it's reducing balance. So there's two types of depreciation. So you mustn't use straight line. Some accountants use straight line, which goes from values right down to nil and write them up to nil. Well, that's not realistic because you'll always have the value. So reducing balance is 15% of the remaining balance. So that's the curve I mentioned earlier on here.
Yeah.
So and it curves down gradually 15%. So yeah.
So Gary, back to Mike's question: how do you tell your clients how to reduce the cost of depreciation? Is there one simple way of doing it, or?
Yes, absolutely. Basically, what you need to do is look at the value of machinery you've got in your business. So in an arable business, it's crept up a lot. Most of my clients now have on average around about £350 in English terms per acre. £350 per acre is the average value of machinery, and then you're reducing that by 15% every year. So you need to look at that at the value of kits you've got, 350. So my top 10%, because we benchmark about 100,000 acres over the Eastern County, nearly all arable. My top 10% would be 230. The top 25, 386. And the bottom 25, over £500 per acre. So there's a huge range in the value of kit in arable farms. So the key thing is to bring machinery management, and we've got other questions later on that are linked to this, such as planned replacement policy you need and all that sort of thing, using spreadsheets, which many of my clients do now. So it brings some management. I think just to round this off, there's a lot of input into variable costs. We all use agronomists on farms. but the amount of variable costs is almost about the same amount as machinery costs. And how much input do we have into machinery costs? Minimal compared to agronomists. So I think most farmers would benefit from looking at their planned machinery replacement policy, the value of kit they've got per hectare. One of the key benchmarks I'm using now is machinery value per ton of wheat. And that's really interesting, because that relates to regen farming as well, which Mike Purnell here is doing. So he's seen those figures we do on the benchmark. So you can't just reduce it, Hugh. You've got to go into the background and start putting some detailed management into machinery, and you can actually share machinery. We'll perhaps go into machinery syndicates and sharing later on.
But as you say, it's all about getting a total handle on what your machinery is actually costing you from the first place, because without that figure, you might as well, pull a figure out the air and guess it in terms of what your depreciation cost is.
Depreciation is a result.
So as a result, exactly, of those costs.
To the cause.
Mike Purnell, what's your policy on farm? I mean, how do you manage? What's your golden rules for managing your machinery fleet depreciation?
Well, I think to the original question, there's a really flippant answer, which is own less kit and keep it longer, and therefore your machinery, your depreciation will go down. So I think where obviously being the regen, the direct drilling route, we don't have a lot of kit. Our depreciation last year, everything included, 106,000 on 1,000 hectares. So £106 a hectare of depreciation we did last year. And that's not, I mean, that's gone up quite a lot because I bought a brand new sprayer in 2021. So yes, it's a figure we need to keep our eye on, because it can suddenly make your accounts look awful. We do, and it's later questions, I know, on the plan questions, but we do have a bit of a policy, because you've got to have a policy going forward. So we bought the sprayer, best part of 300k 2 years ago. So there's a deliberate thing. We're going to buy nothing expensive this year or last year, 23 harvest.
And your policy on, buy less kit, sweat it a lot longer, presumably you're building into that the sort of kit you're going to buy. A tractor, you'll presumably, if you're expecting it to last for 10 years, you're going to spend some money on a tractor as opposed to go bargain basement and hunt around for the cheapest new tractor you can find. Yes,
100%. So I mean, so as well as from operator satisfaction, Gordon will love my answer, but we've got a class combine. It's not the most expensive combine I can buy, but my plan is to keep that for 8 years. My plan is to keep the sprayer for 8 years, I've not bought the most expensive, but we've got an Agrifax sprayer. I run John Deere tractors, so again, not the most expensive, but I'm not knocking any other brands that are out there, but I have a fair chunk of hope that my tractor will last 8 years. So I think when you look at, obviously you can look at hiring, you can look at owning. Owning, you might say you're just taking a gamble on residual value, which then makes you either have a profit or not on your sale at the end of it. But yeah, we're sort of looking at the better brands that I hope will last 8 years. I think if you're trying to keep a tractor for 3 years and you want to get rid of it, you might as well hire. If you want to keep it 5 years, hiring is probably about the same price as owning. And if you want to keep it 8 years, as long as you've got the cash up front or the cash isn't costing you too much over that time, you're going to be cheaper to own it. But obviously you are then liable to, as the depreciation declines, you've probably got higher repair bills, which are still coming out of your cash at the end of the day.
And you've got the risk factor. We hire a contract hire a telehandler, and it's by far the most cost effective over a 5-year period, without hopefully any scary explosions in year 3 and 4, which can completely blow your budget. Gordon, what do you tell your clients, the Fram Farmers members, when you're dealing with them and they're whinging about the cost of kit and they're scared by the amount of depreciation on their book? What's your rule to them?
Well, that's almost a daily conversation, actually. I think everything that Mike and Gary have said is absolutely right. First of all, there is no silver bullet, or else everybody would be doing it. It depends on each individual farm, as you said earlier. But if depreciation is a problem to you, then certainly looking at the hire route is one angle that we very much go down to. We have one or two hire companies that we deal with a lot, and we get pretty good deals from them. Is it a long-term fix? Probably not. But as a short term, if depreciation is causing a problem, then hire. The best way to hire a machine, tractor, combine, sprayer, whatever, is probably over a 24-month period. That's the sweet spot for the hirer versus the farmer, rather than the short 10 weeks, whatever. If you're going to do a hire, do it for 24 months. That seems to be the sweet spot.
But presumably with a proviso that depends on the number of hours in the case of a tractor, for example, because from experience, there's a big jump between, say, 1,000-hour hire policy per annum versus a 1,500 hour a year hire deal.
Yeah, of course there is, because it all comes down to the residual value. As I say many times, the hire job, the little bit in the middle, which is what our farmers or the customer pays, is actually the easy bit. The difficult bit from the hirer's point of view is what he pays for the machine, and therefore at the end of the 1, 2, 3 or years that he has it on his hire fleet, it's his residual value. So the bit in the middle is actually the easy bit. So in terms, typically the average tractor, we have a lot of veg growers. The average tractor is doing about 1,200 hours a year. I think we've got a question coming up in a little while about that. Average is about 1,200, 1,500 hours a year is starting to get expensive.
Yeah, it does, and obviously there's going to be some. I mean, telehandlers actually are a good example, aren't they? Because if you said to a dairy farmer, "Oh, you should contract hire a telehandler," and they're on 12,000 hour a year deals, they'll just laugh you out the door because they're running those machines flat out 9-10 hours a day, and easily going way over 1,500 hours. So therein is another challenge. David, when you're designing machinery and you're there coming up with these beautiful concepts and these things that are going to change the lives of farmers and users around the world, does the idea of depreciation and value come into your head, or is it all about what you can get to market and get away with some, that people want to buy?
That's a good question there, Hugh. I mean, definitely your residual value of your machine is very important to your brand. So when you're designing a machine, it is about designing a machine that's reliable. It's got efficient running costs that basically does the job that the relevant farmer's looking for on their farm effectively. We're not over engineering, and I think there's a question about technology coming up as well. I know we're very technology driven, but it's also getting the right machine to do the job, not be too technical, and have a good resale value at the end with efficient running costs. I mean, every machine will have running costs, but if you made the machine to be perfect and it would be that expensive, no one would afford it. So you hit that sweet spot and maintaining the residual value basically with the design.
Yeah, you've got to sort of balance off the pros and cons, and presumably also it's a bit of a nightmare when you're buying an external components, trying to work out what fits best and what's going to give the best value for money in terms of reliability. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, again, you've got your own parts that you manufacture yourself, but you're looking at external components, and again, it's that quality that you need to buy to make sure you deliver that quality product. And definitely, it's a strong focus at Claydon, and we have good resale values with the Claydon product, but that's relative to many machines that you're looking for is to find that spot.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. Don't forget, you can send questions in on the text box. There's a random question appeared on the text box, and I wonder whether this gentleman's actually on the right screen because it's just come in, and it's starting when ? That's from John Legg Bragg, who's perhaps he's looking at a blank screen and he just needs to refresh it. And we might all suddenly appear because we did start bang on time, John. We started bang on 5 o'clock. Right, let's move on to the next question. Now, this comes from James Hanby, and now it's in the guise of it sounds like James is rearing and finishing 1,000-odd cattle a year, but obviously it's applicable to any sector, be it arable, livestock, or whatever. And his question is, do you have a formula when you should bring an operation in-house? And his example is we use a livestock haulier to move our cattle to slaughter, about 1,000 a year, bought on and off the farm. At what point should we decide to buy our own transport? Presumably, Mike Pennell, when there's certain jobs on the farm that you contract out, that you think, like, I just don't want the hassle and the potential go wrong factor of this kit or that kit, and you're happy to hire it out? Or do you have a golden rule in your business when you'll pick up and do something yourself?
No, we do some and some. So the arable work, I mean, with 1,000 hectares, you like to think if you can't justify owning your own combine, your own spray on 1,000 hectares, then what acreage do you need? But certainly, we don't do any hedge cutting. Contractor does that. We've got a small beef suckler enterprise. They literally come into carve. Other than that, they're out 12 months a year. But so I need 100 straw bales a year. I'm not owning a baler for 100 straw bales. Man comes in and does it. The same with hay stroke silage. We make some bales of hay silage. So I don't have any grassland machinery because I'm just not big enough to justify having the machinery. It just wouldn't pay. It's cheaper to pay a contractor. So, back to the original question, I guess the thing is the easy bits are trying to work out how much he's charging you, presumably for his lorry, and how much a lorry would cost you, and what the running costs are on the lorry. But and then you can come up with working out which is cheaper. I mean, with 1,000 head going, I don't know how many loads that is, but to me that sounds quite a lot. But the thing not to undervalue is then if you're doing it yourself is the amount of time you will have to put into yourself that potentially you're not at the minute, and do not undervalue your own time. Not only the physical cost of your time, but the opportunity cost of what you're not doing when you're driving your lorry to the abattoir.
Absolutely. And the other thing, of course, in this particular example with regards to the haulage, if you then employ your own driver with an HGV and that person is off ill, you're stuck. Whereas if you're relying on another company, hopefully they've got people that can step into the breach. I'd have thought you'd have done your own hedge cutting, Mike. You arable farmers have got all the winter to play around. I thought you just, drive. Why don't you do the hedge cutting? Because a lot of arable farmers do, don't they? They're quite in love with the idea of hedge cutting.
Or they're skiing and shooting.
Well, yeah. Clearly, you've got a lot of skiing and shooting to do, Mike.
Skiing, not shooting. No, we just... Because basically we've got an awful lot of hedges, and we get a contractor in who's got 3 machines. We don't start until nearly as late as we can get away with. So certainly not the new year, because we want to get as many berries as we can through the winter for feed for the birds, which leads you in a very contracted to get finished by the end of Feb. But also we carve in Feb, so we just don't have the time. And he whacks 3 hedge cutters in and blitzes it. Gets the job done. Yeah, we are, and he's also they're good at it. Yeah. We've got some of the hedges are just arable hedges. Some of them are for show, and he'll even billy a table flat, to be quite frank. And I've done hedge cutting. I know I won't. You want A-frame hedges to get the light down the hedge, not billy a table flat. That's bad. Not in this neck of the woods, you don't.
We'll just start a new craze because it's so much better for the hedges.
But also just to expand, we are also having a policy of doing much less hedge cutting now for wildlife to try and let them bulk up, both in terms of width and height a bit as well.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. We do. What do we probably have 5 or 6 days of hedge cutting here, and I have contemplated getting you get tempted, don't you? See a reasonably priced second-hand. I could do that myself and save $2,500 a year, but it's a bit of it. I wouldn't do it because I'll be rubbish at it. Gary Markham, do you have a formula, or is it all of what Michael's just said?
Yeah, so James Hanby did ask, do you have a formula? There is a formula, actually, in a farm management situation aspect. It's we call a partial budget. And partial budgets they're a very, very useful tool for making decisions within a business rather than looking at the whole business. So a partial budget, very simply, you've got a plus column and a minus column. The plus column is extra income, less costs, and the minus column is less income, extra costs. And if you did that, if actually James Hanby did that on a spreadsheet and actually juggled around with those, you need to bring the risk factor in that you said. If you employ somebody and they're ill, etc., you're back to a contractor. But a partial budget is the answer in terms of a formula. And I use a partial budget with clients in many situations. It's just a simple spreadsheet plus and minus, 2 columns, and see what if on a spreadsheet. And if James Hanby did that, I'm sure he'd come up with an answer.
Yeah, it's not. And actually, if you think about it, I mean, in this particular example, 1,000 cattle, what a finished cattle, that's 25 loads of 40 cattle, and a wagon. Let's say the wagon was costing you £1,000 a time, 25 grand. If you double that, 50 grand, and you think what a wagon and a rig costs, and the driver, and I'd say you're way off justifying doing it yourself, unless you want the joyous surprise of a blown up gearbox on Boxing Day morning when you've got a load of cattle to get in between Christmas and New Year. We've all been there. David Ferber, in terms of what you do with your business at Claydon, presumably you've got jobs in the manufacturing side that you hire out because it's not worth you having the kit or the tech to be able to do them in-house because the capex involved.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to look at the manufacturing process, and there is certain parts of the manufacturing process that we outsource because we can't, like you said, capex the investment, and it's not worth the investment. And you know, it's all like you said, it's a calculation basically based on volume, what the charge out is, what your internal rate is, and finding the most effective way to produce the machinery. So very similar, really.
It's just different sector, different, but the same challenges. Gordon, do you have a rule of thumb when people come to you and say, Gordon, we want to spend 250,000 quid on this great bit of kit? Do you ever find yourself saying, whoa, hang on, just steady now, you can hire it in and have less risk? Oh, I don't know where Gordon's gone. Gordon, I think you need to unmute yourself if you're muted. No, I think we've lost Gordon. I can't see him on my screen. So we'll just move on. So that one is basically, it's about knowing your cost. And I think you're right, Gary. The risk thing is a really big thing, whether that's an HR, as in a human resource risk, or a mechanical risk at 5 years old. It's all, it's some of it can be pretty scary. We've lost, well, I don't know where Gordon's gone. So we'll just try and get Gordon back on the call. He's obviously having some problem with his internet where he is. Let's move on to Tim Sheehans, because the next question was about co-ops, but I want to wait till we got Gordon back on because he works for a co-op. We'll move on to Tim Sheehan's question, which is the cost of machinery is rising far and above the price of grain, which is remaining static in real terms. You could argue actually over a 15-year period it's going back in real terms. In real terms, we'll only go so far in the cost of machinery in machinery inflation is far in excess of this. So what you're saying is the cost of kit's going up, but obviously what we're producing is not. Is there a simple answer to this, Gary? Presumably it's get together and do more efficiently, or just
absolutely, yeah. And we don't want to go and answer the one on co-ops until Gordon comes back, but that is the answer. And I can talk in more detail when that question comes up. But yes, absolutely, sharing kit, keeping the cost per acre per hectare down. As I said, it's £350 an acre in terms of value of machinery at the moment on average out there, which commodity farming doesn't stack up, you know, and unless you've got, like Mike has obviously got a system where he's a regen, very low machinery, and you do have a lot of acres, Mike, you know, so 1,000 hectares quite a lot compared to many farms of 600-700 acres. It's a real struggle, and as I said earlier on, machinery has risen up so much, and it's as I said, you know, in my bottom 25% of profitability, they've got over £500 per acre it tied up in machinery, and some people just love machinery. They just buy machinery. I've known. And I know we've got Mr. Claydon here, but I've known a farmer buy a machine on the toss of a coin, David. You know, so there's a salesman there, and the farmer rang me up and he said, Gary, I've just bought the tractor. And I said, well, I didn't think you were going to. He said, well, it was a fairly good deal, and we tossed a coin and I lost, or I won, or whatever it was, and I got the tractor. You know, so that's the management that goes into machine. And as I said at the very beginning, we need more, I think the word is scrutiny. Yeah. You know, the scrutiny into gross margins is huge. The scrutiny into machinery, what we're talking about now, is way behind, and that's where we need We need more scrutiny into machinery just to cost them out, to have planned replacement policies and that sort of thing, which we'll talk about. And, I do run and set up and manage many machinery syndicates, which we'll talk about shortly, if we ever get Gordon back.
Well, yeah, Livy's just trying to get Gordon back. Hopefully, his hotel and Cheshire broadband will sort itself out. It is, and I mean this cost. I mean, could it be that the world of machinery is in or the thoughts around machinery are still harking back 30, 40 years when the value of the output off the farm was far in excess of the cost of a tractor, and people still think it's 1981, don't they? And they can buy 6 brace of Ford 6000s and away they go. Mike, what's your view? I mean, presumably you're stripping back to as much to the bone as you can, and you have done in the 8 years that you've transitioned your business. I mean, yeah, I mean, presumably at some point you're going to have to buy a new drill. You've just bought a new sprayer. A new combine will be round the corner some point in the next 8 years when you sweated the one you've got. Do you have any thoughts on how you insure yourself against that, or those huge rises which are going to happen and will happen?
No. It's a simple answer.
I agree.
I mean, ultimately, it is what it is, and we can all moan about the price of tractors. But if I was to ring up, for example, John Deere now and say, "Can you get me a new tractor for June next year?" They'd say, "No, our factory is full.
Yeah.
We're not taking any more orders." And class get like this every year with combines. The factory is full. You're now talking about harvest 25 till you can get something. So we moan about the price of kit, but people are still buying it because otherwise the factories wouldn't be full. If John Deere can sell it and outsell what they've got, they're not too expensive, you might argue. But no, I mean, we run one system, very simple. We've got horsepower per hectare negligible. We've got 3 tractors. Actually, one of those is hired, 2 owned. It's going to go to 1 owned, 2 hired. Now, I know there's obviously a cost of hiring similar to depreciation and owner. I get that, but our horsepower per hectare is negligible. What we haven't got is, what's the weather doing today? Well, over there I've got a plough, a power harrow, a combi drill. Then I've got a set of discs. Then I've got a subsoiler, and I've got a bit of everything. It's quite simple having one system. We're regen. No fields get made brown. I have no machinery that makes stuff brown. So my machinery list is, I've got a drill, a set of rolls, and a multiplier. That's me done.
Yeah.
That's how you keep your depreciation down.
Yeah, very simple. Gordon, you've come back to us. You're obviously having a bit of connectivity in Cheshire broadband. We were talking about a question which came from Tim Sheehan, and he was basically saying that the cost of machinery is far in excess of the value of what's being produced on farm. Machinery cost inflation has outstripped way the regression, effectively, inflation of farm product. What are your thoughts on this? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and think, how will my co-op members afford going forward? Because the wheat price has just gone down and the tractor price has just done another 20%.
I don't know how controversial you want me to be, really. Presumably
be as controversial as you like. Be as controversial as you like. It's your bridges you're going to burn, Gordon.
No. I've got to the age, my friend, I'm 1 year over retirement age, and I really don't care. But I would try and give our listeners and viewers an absolute honest answer. It might not be what you want to hear, but I'll give you an honest answer. So all I would say is I'd turn the question around and say, you look at the price of land versus the investment value versus what production of it, you would never buy land. You'd never buy it. But they do. And when some land comes up, there's a whole heap of people want to do because God gave up making it a long time ago. You cannot go to the John Deere factory, the Class factory, the Case factory, whatever, turn around to one of those workers and say, by the way, wheat's only £100 a tonne today, so you're going to get half the wages you had last year when wheat was £200. Because they would just say, especially the French, with damn tools, we're off. We'll go and make cars. We'll go and make lorries. We'll go and make trains. Okay? So trying to put a correlation, good or bad, between the cost of the machinery and the cost of whether it be wheat, milk, or whatever, it'll never work. It never happens. Number one. Number two, the price of machinery will never, ever come down. I've been doing this for 47 years. I can honestly say it's never gone down. What manufacturers do when they have a surplus or they've got some overstock situation, they will throw some other goodies at it, a bit like the car guys. So the car prices never come down, but all of a sudden you might get £3,000 towards your finance contribution. At the moment, tractor guys, quite rightly, are looking at the job and saying, well, selling the tractor is only part of the story. What we want is what's called downstream. Because you go and buy a tractor, the dealer or the manufacturer has made a profit or a loss, whichever, but that's the end of the story. Well, they don't want it to be the end of the story, neither do the car people or the lorry people. So what they'll offer you is 5 years interest free, 5 years servicing, 5 years warranty, etc. So your discount is coming, your reduction in price isn't coming off the top price, it's coming off the rest of the life of that machine. We'll come to the life of the machines in a minute. So I think, of course, it's the farmer's view, and quite rightly so, that the price of the machinery is going up and up and up, but my value is going down. All I'll say to you is this. When the price of wheat went from £120 a tonne to 200 and something pounds a tonne, you know, your tractor didn't suddenly double in price, nor should it, nor would it. Okay, so there's a balance. The balance will never be right, but there's got to be a balance. And all I'll say is go on and look at John Deere's figures, look at Class's profit figures, look at CNH's profit figures. They're not exceptional.
They're not. And you could argue as well that whilst the numbers are telephone numbers compared to what they were back in 1981 when you buy a new tractor, the output and the just how much more comfortable it is, how much more stuff you can expect someone to get done in a day compared to then. I mean, it's completely incomparable, isn't it? I mean, it's so different to what it was. When I think what I in the 80s grew up growing as a kid, driving as a kid, compared to what you jump into now.
Well, this is an interesting point, and I had this discussion with one of our members only today. He said, "Oh, well, these tractors are getting far too complicated. We don't, we just want a nice, good, simple tractor." He probably does, but the vast majority of people don't. They want productivity. They want GPS steering. They want headland management systems. They want everything on there, self-steering, everything. And if you were a manufacturer and you said, right, we're going to strip all of that out and we're just going to have a tractor with 4 wheels and a gearbox with a stick in the middle of it, that tractor wouldn't sell. So what I
buy one for my straw chopper. Actually, I put I wouldn't buy to recreate a Massey 185. It would be You're right. It wouldn't sell. And the other thing is interesting. I was in a conversation with a tractor hirer only the other week, and we were looking at John Deere's, and as he said, "Oh, we'll only hire this particular spec, which it's got all the whistles and bells, because they're thinking about resale. So it'll do a year of hire, and they've got to sell it. So it's got to have front suspension, it's got to have all the whistles and bells." David, I mean,
there is just one other thing, if I may.
His phone's
the fact that somebody's trying to ring me.
Someone's phoning to tell you off for being so rude about everyone.
What are your co-op members?
There is an area that a lot of people don't understand, and that is engines. Because in a very short space of time, we've gone from tier 3 to tier 4 to tier 5, tier 5A, and we're moving on. That development for an engine manufacturer is massive, and it costs a huge amount of money. And as soon as they've got that done, and David will understand this, the cost of R&D and developing something, and by the time you've done it and developed it and paid all that off, you're then on to the next one. So it doesn't end there. And the tractor manufacturers, the engine manufacturers have been forced, we don't want to get on to global warming or else we'll be here all night, but these tractor manufacturers have been forced to make these changes to their engines. That's been very, very costly. Who's got to pay for that? And they've only got a short window to get that back before they start the next development.
They're on to tier 7 or tier 8.
Well, a lot of the increase in machinery prices has been down to engines.
And of course we're going to see another big change, I suppose, with alternative fuel source, be that electronic, or you need to put your phone on silent, Gordon. Be that electronic or electric engines or hydrogen or methane or whatever. There's another great lump of R&D about to need to be paid for. David Ferber, in terms of what you know when you're designing drills, when you're coming up with ultimate bits of kit, you must be mindful of the I mean, you're obviously mindful of the inflationary cost of steel and microchips, because you buy that and turn it into stuff we can use on farms. I mean, how do you cope with that from a manufacturer's perspective?
Well, I mean, from a manufacturing perspective, of course, it's been a challenging number of years, hasn't it? After the COVID and the war in Ukraine, that actually drives up the prices of chips and steel. So, I mean, that's had a massive effect. And then we have this labour shortage as well at the present time, which everyone in farming is well aware of, and in many other industries, the increased cost of labour and keeping labour to do the jobs. And, as you rightly say, it is a balance, and it's getting, again, you've got to look at efficiencies and efficiencies of the machine. Can you reduce the number of machines you have one machine to do more of your tasks on the farm, keep the system simpler. But for us as a manufacturer, it is when designing, it is actually, looking at the components in the machine, trying to engineer out some cost. You also are mindful that, there is a market. Obviously, people are buying for efficiency. There is a price point relevant to every machine. But, at the moment, the demand is there. There's been a good demand for machinery, efficient machinery. And it's, like you said, it's also, as Gordon said, it's the regulations as well. I mean, if you go into the environment and where you're being pushed on regulations, has a massive impact on machine prices.
It's hugely challenging from lots of angles. This is like something we're going to have to get used to, and I suppose what it underpins is back to where we started, really, isn't it? When we were talking about depreciation, is absolutely quantifying the machinery need and requirement of the business to make sure you get the absolute best value you can, and you haven't got, because you're right, there are farmers who quite literally have yards full of machinery. I know a dairy farmer who said to me once when he came to help us suck out a tank, and he said, "Oh, of course, the only reason we've got all the cows is so we can buy all these wonderful tractors." And it was just like, and if I took you to his yard, you'd get where I was coming from, because nothing gets resold. It's just it's going to be a great museum in 50 years. Gordon, when the Cheshire internet thief disconnected you from us, we were about to go on to a question, which is from Liam Turner, which is: do the speakers see the value in machinery co-ops, and why are they rare in the UK? So you work for a co-op. You work for a co-op that will buy machinery for people and presumably sort out hire deals. Presumably, by doing it from that perspective, you're saving customers money than if they were a standalone purchaser on their own, not part of your co-op.
I think probably what Liam was meaning was machinery rings rather than cooperatives. I remember back in the 80s in my local town, I won't say where it is, they decided that they wanted to set up a machinery ring. And there was a public meeting or a farmers meeting, and about 250 farmers turned up. And the concept, of course, is absolutely 100% correct. There's all this machinery out there, underutilized, whatever. And everybody was saying, what a fantastic idea. And I really desperately wanted to stand up and say, hands up those people who believe that they will be a provider, and hands up those people who believe they will be a customer. In other words, the vast majority want to say to people, you come along and hire my machines off me. And the vast majority of people aren't the ones that say, I will hire them off you. And that's where it falls down. Now, on the continent, there are more of these machinery rings, but we all know continental farming tends to be, in a lot of cases, much smaller family-type farms. This is where those sort of things will work. In terms of Fram farmers, yes, we are a cooperative. Yes, we look after machinery. We have in the past, I remember when rape swathing first came out in the 70s, Fram farmers had a syndicate where members came in put some money in, and they bought some rope swathers. It was off a very young 21-year-old good-looking salesman who worked for Shelbourne Reynolds at the time. And that was my first introduction to Fram farmers. It's the same thought that farmers have who are down, say, at Whitbread Farms. You finish with your combine, oh, we'll ship it up to Scotland. Invariably, Scotland's sometimes in front of you. And so this wonderful idea of moving everything up country has worked for some people, but in the vast majority it doesn't. So unless you can balance 50-50 with the people who want to hire out their machines versus the people who want to hire them, it won't work, sadly. Good idea on paper, great idea. What has worked is farm cooperatives where the farm moves together and 3 or 4 farms to get together as a business. Gary, you'll be able to help with this one. 3 or 4 businesses get together, they pool everything, including the machinery, they sell the grain, and then they share out on the acreages. Gary, you've probably got some better stories than I have. I think that's where it would work.
It does work. I think the one observation I would have, though, in terms of on the hire, we have seen, I would say, an increase in the last 5 to 10 years, certainly in the last 5 years, of spot hire machinery outlets. I can think of 2 or 3. There are some that have been there historically that have been hiring out tractors for 30 years, 40 years. You'll know who they are, Gordon.
Yeah.
There are some that have suddenly come to the market, and I can think of one in particular along the M4. When you look at the range of kit that he has now got on hire in less than 3 or 4 years, because the building trade hires in diggers. When they need a 3-ton digger, boom, it's there. But I suppose farming isn't as flexible as that because they want to dig ditches or dig foundations year round. Gary Markham, you have indeed worked on lots of projects with owners, with families. Your main thing there is not so much machinery rings or co-ops, it's consolidating assets and optimizing what's needed to farm the land effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. So, Gordon, yeah, machinery rings. I have been involved in machinery rings in the past, and yeah, they don't tend to work very well. But machinery, what I call machinery syndicates, where 4 or 5 farmers come together and jointly own the machinery in another entity, which for tax purposes needs to be an LLP, not a company. And then share all those machinery. So. And I've got about a dozen or 15 of these going back to 20 odd years. So some of the bigger ones are about 10,000 acres now. So they're fairly big. And the key thing about sharing machinery, because you're going to be arguing where the combine is or where the combines are or where the drill is, etc. So what we've done with all of ours is you have an LLP where the farmers have a stake in the LLP based on their productive acreage, okay? And then, in addition to that, we have a share farming agreement. So, as Gordon, I think Gordon or Hugh said, so therefore, so every farmer has a percentage share in all the crops based on a share farming agreement, which is a standard HMRC model that they accept. So you've got 4 or 5 farmers actually farming, they're running their own businesses, sharing the machinery, but sharing gross margins. And when you come together, that is like a true co-op in a way. And that works really, really well. We've had those going, as I said, I think just the year 2000 is when we first started doing them. And we're still putting them together. I recently, in the last 2 years, put 2,000-3,000 estates together into one 6,000 unit. And where the machinery are in one block in an LLP, and they're shared out, and they work extremely well. So things like well-being comes into it, because you've got 4 or 5 farmers lonely working on their own, and that's a big thing in the industry at the moment. Stress and well-being. So suddenly you're all working together, and it creates a lot of fun. And it works really well, and you bring down that capital value machinery to about £250 per acre from 350 as a target, which as a result, going back to the beginning, it brings the depreciation down, and so they work exceptionally well. So in periods of high grain, because we're English, I believe, because I've worked in Australia and New Zealand, during my lifetime. Because we're English, we tend to run our own castles, and so when the grain prices are high, batten down the hatches. We're on our own, chaps. We can survive. And then the grain prices get lower again. Oh, hold on, we better look. Better talk to me or somebody else about perhaps we should be sharing bits of kit.
Yeah, they should. It is a problem. Like I say, it's the peril of communication. Gordon, can I just ask you to mute your mic because your Cheshire internet's that's beautiful. It's got a funny buzz.
There's a halfway house. I'm just going to finish you. There's a halfway house where you can share a combine. Share a regen drill if you're going into regen, etc. So there's a halfway house. It hasn't got to be everything.
Presumably as well, Gary, if you were say 3 owners with 2,500 acres each, and you put all the kit up for sale, had a massive auction, got it all sold, went out and bought the perfect fit for that 7,500 odd acres you've then got, that contracting company, you can play around a lot with costs and cost base, and in a good year, the contracting company can charge less or more, and presumably the individuals are disconnected somewhat from their third party to the depreciation issue that's going on in the service providing company.
Yes, so various things. So initially, a very brief point. So back to scrutiny. You have ring fenced all your labour and machinery. So you've got scrutiny, which you bring in the scrutiny into it in there. So, but the way we fund ours is on a cash basis, not a contracting charge. But so when the syndicate wants to buy £50,000 worth of red diesel, that's split in proportion to productive acreage. So it's a true joint venture as opposed to contract farming, which I believe is not. It's a true joint venture because you're cost sharing, and you're cost sharing everything. And some of my syndicates now, the variable costs go through. They bulk buy from like from farmers or other co-ops. They can bulk buy things into there in huge larger amounts, and just create that efficiency. But going back, is the scrutiny that really works, because we have quarterly meetings on Teams these days, quarterly meetings with all the members, and the figures come forward and we look at them. It works, and it is the answer to most of these problems that we've been discussing, I believe, together with the share farming agreement, which is essential, which is an answer to depreciation, to the cost of machinery. It is the way forward.
Yeah, totally. Mike Pennell, would you consider sharing your... I mean, could you drill any more? You've got your 3,000 acres to get across.
Yeah.
If you got out of bed a bit more and went into the night and did a few 24/7 days...
He already does. Yeah.
Could you drill more out of that driller? Is it absolutely maxed out?
Oh no, we got the bargain tractor with no lights. So at 4 o'clock I'll have to go home. That's it. I don't work till 4 o'clock. I think to take a bit of Gordon honesty, although I'm not at the end of my career, so let's hope it's not too. The trouble is, we are English. We like to own our own houses, whereas every other place they rent houses. We're obsessed by owning a house. We're obsessed by doing it ourselves. But also we have this lovely thing amongst farmers where we can't even get on with our own brother or father, let alone our neighbour. So how on earth are we going to make a business with our neighbour next door? From my point of view, none of my neighbours, there's plenty of peering over the hedge, but pretty much all my neighbours, to be fair, are tenants of the estate, so that they will view regen as a bit of a risk for when you get the rent bill coming in. So people are sort of tinkering but not doing it. So from my point of view, actually, as a regen man, if I then did a joint venture with my neighbour and found myself having to buy a plough and a power harrow, one, that's not a direction I really want to be going in, but two, it's probably going to add cost. I know Gary is the king of joint ventures, but and I get it on a bit of paper, but you could
go and drill. If he ploughed it and power harrowed it, you could go and drill. You can go and drill his wheat and sweat your drill a bit harder. But you don't.
To be honest, I'd rather do it as a contractor, and I know it probably doesn't make any sense, but we need to look at this. But I'd rather do it as a contractor than in a form of a joint venture, because I think it's this whole concept that possibly we have the fear of losing control.
Yeah.
So when I'm a contractor, I'm looking after my drill. No one else is going to bend it on a telegraph pole and not. Although, of course, it wouldn't be my drill; it would be our drill.
The drill.
But it's just losing control, and I think that's something that even me, who tries to be fairly forward-thinking, open-minded, is terrified of.
No, I get that. And look, where I am in Surrey, I've got two large arable farmers either side of me, and when they're both in the pub jousting about drills and tractors and whatnot, and we're talking about drills, and I'm saying, look, you're both going to go out and spend 100 grand plus on a new drill. Why don't you just buy one and just sweat it harder? And they, you know, we're not even combined. They're not even 4,000 acres. So you sort of think to yourself, but it's the comms thing. It's, we've got to be organised if we do that. We'd have to have a drilling programme, or we'd actually have to get together and have regular meetings. David, clearly, David, you're in no worry about not selling. You know, the numbers of Claydon drills sold is not likely to drop off a cliff because of amazing cooperation between UK farmers, is it? That's a good thing from your point of view.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, but I think, you know, in all this, it's timeless, isn't it? It's the weather windows that we're all facing. And I think, you know, a year like this really brings it home to people that, you know, you need to have the right machine and, of course, buy the right machine for your size of land, but enable you, because if you don't get a crop in the ground or you don't get your crop harvest, you've got no income. And I think that is, you know, part of the issue we face in the UK compared to Europe and France, where there is more cooperatives. They do have, generally speaking, you know, better weather windows.
Yeah, they do, and I suppose culturally they're better at working together for lots of different reasons, depending on which part of Europe you go to. Gordon, one thing I've sort of wondered is, obviously there's probably more tractor hire happening now than there was 10 or 20 years ago, and for lots of reasons. Presumably, from a manufacturer's point of view, and you've worked in dealerships, you've worked for manufacturers. Presumably, from a manufacturer's point of view, they wouldn't want to make the market too flexible, would they? Because otherwise there'd just be there'd be less tractors sold effectively, because the hirers would be sweating fewer tractors to the same number of farmers. Is that a fair point, or is that me just being slightly paranoid and deranged?
No, I think all manufacturers work on one thing and one thing only, and that's market share, and that's what keeps them awake at night. The sales managers in all these different tractor companies, it keeps them awake at night. So anything they can do to increase not as much their sales from a profitability point of view, but from a market share. And you're absolutely right. There's been quite a large rise in the last few years on tractor hire. We organise probably somewhere 120, 150 tractor hires a year. But coming right back to the very first question this evening, which was depreciation. And the other thing, there are lots of disadvantages of hiring, but one of the advantages of hiring, and Gary will hear me out on this, is the fact of depreciation, because it's a cost. And so you don't get the depreciation. You don't have the asset, you don't have the ownership, all right, but you don't have the depreciation. Sorry, Gary, you can't.
Gary's shaking his head. That's what I've always thought. If I hire it, I've got no depreciation, I've got no risk.
Absolutely, but one of the key benchmarks that I have is what we call access to machinery. And so you can buy a machine, and you can hire a machine, and you can use contractors. Okay. So one of the ways of getting depreciation down is not to buy a machine, but to hire it. But your hire charge isn't there. Okay. Or you can use a contractor. So I've given up comparing depreciation between farms, because some farmers hire a combine and you haven't got any depreciation, so you can't compare. So therefore, the only way of looking and comparing is access to machinery. And so you add depreciation, you add a hire charge, and you have all the contracting fees. And that therefore is your access to machinery to grow and manage your crops. Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but to get depreciation down, you've got a higher charge instead. So to actually benchmark between farms and to assess the true cost of access to machinery, you've got to add those three together.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm not advocating hiring. It's part of a package,
Yes.
Because the other thing we haven't mentioned in terms of hiring, of course, is repairs and maintenance.
Yeah,
because that suddenly becomes somebody else's problem. Okay, And I know a lot of farmers that have looked at hiring, short-term hiring, whether it be tractors, whether it be not so much combines, but tractors, trailers, and everything else, is this lack of maintenance costs. It's somebody else's problem. It's a known figure. You know exactly what that tractor is going to cost you for that period of time. It doesn't suit everybody. And of course, there's the other little elephant in the room called capital allowances. And that has certainly come to the fore. And looking at the autumn statement yesterday, if I understand it right, Gary, I mean, that's just not as much expanded, but continued on. All I would say there, and I'll tell you a funny story, years ago, I was a young salesman, and I went to this farm, and he was umming and ahhing about a few pound on this tractor. And I said to him stupidly, I said, well, it doesn't matter. You're not paying for it anyway. You get your 100% capital allowances. He said, young man, he said, I'm going to teach you a lesson. You only have capital allowances if you make profit.
Exactly.
Think about that one, young man. Now off you go. I'm not buying your tractor. And I remember that because it was me thinking, oh, you don't pay for this. Of course, it's technically right as long as you've made that money in the first place.
It was a good sales pitch, though. Well done.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. So look, there's lots of variables there. We've got time for one more question, which sort of, I suppose we've gone full circle. We've talked about the fleet overall, the cost of the fleet overall, bringing in-house, not going in-house, talked about co-ops and hiring. And one question here, which is, how do people operate a planned replacement policy to smooth out investments in machinery? So whatever we've decided to do, Gary, what's your rule of thumb with your clients in terms of how you plan that?
Yeah,
and presumably this is about owning it, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, owning it, in fact. So I have, over the years, many years ago, developed an 8-year spreadsheet. And you actually put in when you're going to buy and sell machinery, and then that averages it out on a per annum basis and on a per hectare basis, or a per acre basis as well. So, and I have many clients using that model now. And so the key, it does various things. If you are over mechanized at the moment, you can actually start managing that down to an amount per hectare that you're coming back to the target of 350 or 275 capital per hectare over that period, and you can also space out when you're going to buy things. And I think Mike said earlier on, very beginning, that you keep machines over an 8-year period. So it needs to be over the whole cycle of most of your kit. And so I have a spreadsheet that's been developed over the years, and it's been used widely by many of our clients, and it helps a great deal.
Yeah, you're able to plan it through. Michael, you said at the beginning, as Gary just said, you just stick to your thing is 8 years, and that's, you just roll on that 8-year plan.
Well, on the big bits, I have a telehandler that's an 04 plate, so what we're on now, 19 years old, but it's worth nothing. I think it sits on the books at 79 quid, but it's worth, it's
79 grand.
It's worth thousands to me. But I can't justify spending 55,000 replacing it. So we got some big repair bills on it, like Gordon's just said. But depreciation this year will be about a £5. But no, so we bought the combine in 18. That'll do 8 years. So that will, give or take, that will get replaced in 26. And it's one of these things where I need to know that for the 10, 12 weeks of a year, I turn up there every morning, turn the key, and it works. So although it might not break down in that 8th year, you then 9th year, 10th year, where's my residual value? Where's my reliability? So 8 years sort of seems about right. So we bought the combine in 18, that would be 26, it gets replaced. We bought the sprayer 3 years later because obviously we saw a huge hike in depreciation on year 1, year 2. So didn't want to buy anything expensive then. So we looked at what other little bits were bought in that time, but nothing expensive. The sprayer then went in 21. What I've realised now is we're coming into sort of 2024. My combine's going to get replaced in 26 in theory, and I need to spend 120, 150 grand on a drill. well, I'm not going to do it in 25 because it will then be by 26 with a new combine, blah, blah, blah. So it's got to be this year. It's as simple as that. So we put the money in the budget. It's got to be this year. Then I'll buy the drill this year, cheap year next year, combine, cheap year, hopefully cheap year, and then another sprayer probably. And that will be sort of my 8-year thing, just to keep that depreciation number where it should be, but also without building in too many repairs by having 10, 12-year-old machines, and then the cost of having 3 days where your combine's broken and it's your 3 dry days of August. So tractors are a bit different. Tractors I've sort of run to about 8,000 hours. As long as they're not breaking down, we'll run tractors to 8,000 hours, and then we'll have to fit that in a year. We're not buying anything else, but I'm not afraid of hiring in. If I've got a real dog, I'll hire him for a year or 2 years, or maybe hire him permanently, because the beauty of a hire is I do get a new tractor every 2 years.
Yeah, and it goes back. David, do you find yourself, David, you've got drill customers that regular as clockwork buy a new drill every 5 years because they're so well planned and smooth in terms of their replacement policy?
Yeah, I mean, there is a number of customers that do that, and then there's the customers that are driven by the advancements in the drilling technique or the regulations, basically, like the single farm payments and the regenerative farming schemes. But yeah, it's a mix, and then of course you've got a number that just come to the market that don't have a regular replacement policy.
Yeah, the ad hoc car. And Gordon, do you find that, again, you've got a mix of customers, some that have a very organised replacement policy and obviously some that don't and are disorganised, in effect?
Oh, no, of course, all of our members are totally organised.
Because you're helping them, Gordon, that's why. It's the value for money they get, Yeah,
it'd be nice. Now, I think there's another area I'd like to just go back on something Mike just said there, which is actually very, very true as well, particularly on tractors and combines, and that is technology. Technology is moving at such a pace. If you go back 3 or 4 years, the difference between a tractor then and now is phenomenal in terms of what they do and the technology. If you hire the tractor, and you hire it, this is where I say the sweet spot is the 2-year hire. You know that in 2 years' time, you're going to change that, whether you buy one or you rehire another one, but you're going to keep yourself up to date with technology. And if that's important to you, and it is becoming more and more important, not just for the bells and whistles and the latest gizmo, but I mean, GPS systems are getting more and more accurate, different signals, different ways of getting the signal in, the correction signals and things like this. This is changing so rapidly that if you end up buying the tractor, fine, there's all sorts of reasons why you should, capital allowance, etc. But one of the advantages of hiring is it almost forces you to keep up with technology, which was the point that Mike was making.
Yeah, it's a big. It's a rapidly moving feast, but it goes in fits and starts, doesn't it? And then, of course, there's the wonders of machinery manufacture. No, I'm not singling you out at all here, David, but there are certain machinery manufacturers that love to reinvent the wheel and re-energize what's actually the same, but with a different button or a different bit of graphics around it to make it seem really, really good and squeaky. It reminds me the story of replacement policy, and it comes into it as well in terms of good housekeeping and good maintenance. But I remember some years ago there was an article in the magazine about a gentleman, arable farmer, who'd previously worked in the aviation industry, and his policy was they didn't talk about how much it actually cost him, but he had this finite hours worked policy on bearings, on parts for his combine. Now, he never broke down, but what it was actually costing him to replace stuff which hadn't actually broken, obviously it wasn't an aircraft, it was a combine. It's an interesting concept, but probably not one that's financially sustainable, particularly in today's market with arable prices where they are, and the arable prices where they are, and obviously the cost of machines and parts going up where they go. Very quickly, one very final little question here. Jamie McIntyre, how do you best manage finance payments when you can get 100% capital allowance in the first year, but have 3 or 4 years payments ahead? The following year, you won't have the allowances unless another machine is bought. And then there's payments on 2 machines and so on and so forth. Presumably the capital allowance is on. You discount as much as you can in that year that you can you can effectively offset it, Gary, correct?
Yeah, so yeah, Gordon just mentioned. So we've got 100% annual investment allowances on up to $1 million in any business. And that's in corporates. There isn't $1 million, but that's in the larger businesses, and any farm's not going to buy more than £1 million a year normally in terms of machinery. So we do have yes, 100% allowance, and that comes back to actually planned replacement policy, because I build into planned replacement policies capital allowances. So we have pre-year-end tax planning meetings, and if you buy a piece of kit and bring it into use before the end of the financial year on hire purchase, which is most kit is bought, let's face it, then you can get those 100% allowances. You've got to bring it into use though. Tractor's easy, combine's a bit more difficult unless you go and do the game strips in February or something. So, it's the tax. The tax is very important part of it, because you can actually manage both of those and bring and align them together in terms of your replacement policy. The actual question itself, going back to this 8-year spreadsheet we use, the annual cost of replacement, okay, does roughly equal your hire purchase payments. So you've got your hire and you could argue that depreciation is not a cost in terms of cash, but you've got hire purchase payments replacing that in terms of cash. So you could actually manage your machinery in terms of the hire purchase payments, and that's a very important element in terms of cash flow. So the depreciation in that case is real, because hire purchase payments, capital part, don't appear in the profit and loss account. They're capital, so they are hitting cash flow. Okay, so depreciation is in your fixed costs. Hire purchase capital payments are not in your fixed costs, but they replace them. Okay, so yeah, and I don't quite understand what James is saying, but how do you manage the finance payments when you can get 100%? So you get 100% allowance up front, and then you got your hire purchase payments ongoing after that. So you need to be streamlining your hire purchase payments within that 8-year spreadsheet that we have. You see what I mean? So which is another row below your replacement cost. We have it, so it's in hire purchase, so there it reverts to cash flow. So you can see that the cash flow is evened out. So you're buying a combine not the same time as a tractor. They're all phased. I mean, I think that answers that in some way.
Yes, I think it's slightly confused in the second part of that, but certainly in the first part of that. Just looking forward, guys, just right at the end now, in terms of what, and Gordon, I'll come to you with this one, and to certainly David, technology's changed massively in 5 years. Already I think we've seen a change of emphasis when everyone was talking about the world's going to be run by robots. And yes, I think it probably is going to be run by a certain degree of automation. We had our ideas on blips going around fields that you can't drive. And then the chief John Deere technology officer last January said, actually, this idea of drone robots is rubbish. All we need to do is make the existing tractors autonomous. So you can do the snow ploughing in January and you can still set it off power harrowing. Do you think that the nature of technology is going to change? Because if these machines do become more efficient, i.e. they do drive themselves, it's back to what we were saying earlier. You're going to need less of them, aren't you? So therefore, the ownership or the usage model presumably could change again. It could just be down to hiring these machines in.
Well, I think there's 2 or 3 things in there. In terms of robotics, I was able to, one of my members wanted to look at this, and I brought one of the very first robotic tractors into the country about 4 years ago, the Robotti. And there's the farm droids going around at the moment with specialist vegetable and salad growers coming really into fore. And of course, all the major manufacturers, John Deere, Case 2 in particular, are very much down this autonomous tractors. And the technology is already there. It's the safety angle. So, you've got to be able to make that tractor. Yes, it can work 24 hours a day going up and down the field, but you've still got to move it and you've still got to be safe. And so I think that the days of operatorless tractors probably are not quite here yet, but I can well see that the operator will not have a huge amount to do. He'll just be there, a bit like the train driver or the airline pilot. You know, the minute the airline pilot takes off, he switches on to autopilot, and the only time he actually then interferes is when it lands.
I apologise to any airline pilots that are tuned in. This is the Gordon's detailed synopsis of the years of training and skill that you've undertaken.
The years of training, and the same for the operator, is there for when it goes wrong. As you've noticed this evening with my signal, it's great while it's working. But when it goes wrong, you've got to have somebody with a bit of skill to work out that I'll actually switch to my phone rather than the hotel's internet. So I think there's going to be a lot of AI. We haven't mentioned AI tonight. It's coming. Tractors now, not only with them steer themselves, it works out when it gets to the end of the field, it's going to turn all the implements round and go put itself back into things. So the efficiencies are real and they're there, and those tools are doing a terrific job. I think the next big innovation is actually in fuel, because I really don't see the electric tractor. They certainly don't see the electric combine. And I think we haven't mentioned it tonight, but maybe a subject for a whole new thing. But certainly I think hydrogen is where the job's going. So innovation is always happening, and I feel, whether it's my age or whatever, but it's speeding up. You made the point. It's speeding up. And so you've got to keep up to date with it all.
You have. David, do you think, I mean, you're obviously looking at, you guys make drills and other cultivation kit, but you're looking at where the technology is going. Can you see from what you're doing, a drill is going to be a drill, though, isn't it, going forward? I mean, it's not going to change that much, is it? What pulls it might do, but the process is the same.
Yeah, I mean, innovation has a place, doesn't it? And technology and operator comfort and repeatability of tasks. And we will look for more automation, won't we? We've gone to water steer and headland management systems, and we can automate more of those. But it still comes down to certain machines that are working in very difficult conditions and very variable conditions. And, whether AI can deal with that, the human is still a very intelligent operator. They like have the comforts, but we've got to be careful. We balance, the human interaction. Don't overprice the machines, but use the correct technology to the correct level.
Mike Pinelli, are you going to go and buy, when you get an autonomous option on one of your new tractors, will you be there so it can go power harrowing 24/7 while you go skiing?
I don't do that much skiing.
Well, I think Mike will be able to control his tractor on his iPad from his ski slide. Yeah. That's where it's going.
But what I won't
be able to do everything.
I mean, already, to be honest with you, on a combine, I've got a combine that will set itself. I've got a combine that will steer in straight lines. I've got a combine where I haven't got the option, but it will control the trailer next door to it when you're unloading. All this stuff exists. However, I turn it round at the ends, and that's pretty much all I do. It sounds a bit, but actually, what I do is I haven't got a set. If a sensor comes up, I'm there, or a fault comes up, I'm there to say, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about that. I'm happy with that. I've checked it out. I've gone and looked. It's not on fire. I'll silence a sensor. Well, I can look out the window and see that a knife section's broken, and there probably will be at some stage a sensor that will tell me this, and it will stop the combine. But then the combine stops. But if I'm not on it, where am I? And by the time I'm then an hour to get out to go and fix a combine that's stationary, and I can't run a combine 24 hours, a seed drill, the man on the autonomous driving can't say that it's got a bit of a bung up. And if it does say it's got a bit of a bung up and a coulter's blocked, the robot isn't getting off the seat to go and do it. So it still needs a man to go and poke his finger in a hole. It still needs a man at this stage, person, be politically correct, still needs a person to go and fill the seed tank up when the seeds run out. There's all these, it sounds great, but ultimately you still, perhaps I'm not big enough thinking, but I think
it sounds brilliant. I can't wait till I can buy something and go and roll grass fields and do all the dull, hate sitting on tractors, always have done. I can just go and do all the dull stuff and then just phone me when it's stuck. Hopefully not in a ditch or across a railway line or down the side of a motorway.
That's rolling, that's not putting fert on. So when you're putting fert on, your fert spinner's run out, it's run out of fert. What did it do? Just park up?
No, because it's so precise, Michael. It can do exactly what you want and get back to the yard having done it all. It's gonna be there. Just have faith.
I think what this also brings home, and we haven't mentioned this, is the skill level of, dare I call him a farm or her, a farm worker. The skill level has steadily risen and risen and risen.
Yeah.
And yes, there's less people, but they have to be a higher skill level than what we had 20 years ago and 50 years before that. And the guy or girl who's on these tractors, on these combines nowadays, the level of skill that these people have to have is so much higher. So the training of them, etc., is got to be so much better.
The training does have to be better. Some people would argue, though, Gordon, that they're equally as skilled as the man that walked behind a pair of horses 100 years ago, but they just look at different things and then interpret differently.
Yeah.
But it is changing. Training is key going forward. Guys, we've overrun because we're going to go an hour and 15. We've done an hour and 20. We could stay here all night talking about tractors and depreciation. Crikey with dull. No, it's wonderful. Don't forget this webinar will be available in a podcast. It'll be swiftly turned around and pushed out through the podcast channel fairly soon. So if you missed anything or you want to replay, you can do that. I'm going to thank greatly our panel for tonight. David Ferber from Claydon Drills, thank you very much. Gary Markham, esteemed tax planner and farm accountant, thank you very much. Mike Pennell from Whitbread Farms in Bedfordshire, thank you. And Gordon Cummings from Fram Farmers in his hotel room in Chester with slightly dodgy internet. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you guys who've sent questions in both before and after them. Thank you so much for all your comments and your interactions. It is great to have you along. I hope this has been useful for you. We will have the final Farmers Weekly transition webinar of the year will be in about a month's time, when we will be talking about elms and SFI and all that stuff. So that's some pretty juicy stuff to get into there. But for tonight, thank you so much for your time. And until next time, good evening.